10 Simple Pleasures That Defined 1950s British Life. The 1950s in Britain were an era of quiet rebuilding, a time when life revolved around the simple, comforting rhythms of everyday existence. From the smell of coal fires to the clink of milk bottles at dawn, joy came in small doses but felt deeply earned. These were the years when tea solved every problem, radios were the heart of every home, and neighbors shared sugar and stories in the same breath. Here are 10 simple pleasures that defined 1950s British life, capturing the warmth, resilience, and unpretentious charm of a nation rediscovering happiness. 10. The corner shop experience. Before supermarkets took over, the corner shop was a lifeline, part grocer, part gossip hub. In 1950s Britain, you didn't just buy butter and bread. You caught up on everyone's business while your sugar was weighed on a brass scale. Shopkeepers knew each customer by name, and children spent their pennies on sherbet lemons, blackjacks, or gobstoppers in jars taller than they were. Most of these shops extended credit on a simple promise: put it on the tick. People trusted one another, and bills were settled on payday. Many shops doubled as post offices or sold essentials like newspapers, candles, and tea leaves. In an age before barcode scanners and checkout beeps, these little stores represented human connection. That friendly bell above the door didn't just mark commerce, it marked community. In many ways, these modest stores were the true heart of life in 1950s Britain, where every small purchase came with a smile and a story. 9. Sunday roasts and family dinners. If there was ever a meal that defined 1950s British life, it was the Sunday roast. The ritual stretched from Scotland to the South Coast, a nation united by gravy. Families gathered around small dining tables with a spread that might include roast beef, potatoes crisped in lard, boiled vegetables, and Yorkshire pudding. Even in homes still recovering from rationing, which officially ended in 1954, people made the most of what they had. Leftovers became Monday's shepherd's pie, and dripping from the roast was saved for sandwiches. But the food was only half the story. The real joy lay in sitting together. Father reading the news of the world, mother carving the meat, children squabbling over the last roastie. For many, this simple act of eating together symbolized stability. The aroma of roasting meat drifting through post-war housing estates was the scent of normality returning. It wasn't about extravagance, it was about togetherness. The quiet happiness of a country finding its rhythm again. 8. The wireless and its golden glow. Before television took hold, evenings in 1950s Britain revolved around the wireless. Families tuned in religiously to the BBC Light program, laughing at the Goon Show or following the adventures of Journey into Space. The radio's warm hum filled homes where silence might otherwise have reminded people of what they'd lost. The wireless was furniture, entertainment, and companionship rolled into one. People arranged their evenings around favorite shows, mothers knitting, fathers reading, and children listening wide-eyed to sound effects that fired their imagination. For working-class families who couldn't afford cinema trips every week, the wireless was a portal to the world. It taught, comforted, and united, much like YouTube channels or podcasts do today. In every home across post-war Britain, the glow of the wireless symbolized optimism. The airwaves carried laughter into modest living rooms, proving that joy could travel just as powerfully through static as through song. 7. Riding bicycles through quiet streets. Few sights captured 1950s Britain quite like a bicycle gliding past terraced houses under a gray sky. Petrol was expensive, cars were rare, and bicycles offered freedom on two wheels. Postmen delivered mail on bikes, milkmen pedaled with rattling bottles, and children cycled to school with satchels swinging from handlebars. Cycling wasn't just transportation, it was a way of life. Clubs organized weekend rides into the countryside, and young couples went courting on tandem bikes through leafy lanes. The roads were quieter then. No constant horns, no rush. A simple ride to the next town felt like an adventure. There was independence in the rhythm of the pedals, the breeze, the balance, the sense of control over your own journey. In a decade when money was tight but optimism high, the bicycle represented a rare kind of wealth. Freedom without fuel, happiness without haste. 6. Trips to the seaside. For millions, the highlight of the year was that precious week by the sea. Whether in Blackpool, Brighton, or Scarborough, families packed sandwiches, donned their best coats, and boarded trains for the coast. The journey itself was part of the excitement. Mothers with prams, fathers with straw hats, children pressed against the window shouting at every glimpse of water. Once there, time slowed. Deck chairs lined the promenade, donkeys trudged along the sand, and brass bands played beneath cloudy skies. Rain never ruined the fun. It simply drove families into arcades or fish and chip shops. Butlins and Pontins holiday camps flourished, promising a week's holiday for a week's wages. A stick of peppermint rock, the sound of gulls, the faint tang of salt in the air, all were part of the sensory poetry of life in 1950s UK. The seaside wasn't just a destination, it was a state of joy, proof that happiness didn't need sunshine to shine. 5. Cinema nights and newsreels. Long before Netflix, Britons found magic behind velvet curtains and flickering projectors. The local cinema was an escape, a social event, and sometimes even a love story in motion. In the early 1950s, over 1.4 billion cinema tickets were sold each year. Proof of how deeply the big screen gripped the nation. Ealing comedies such as The Man in the White Suit or The Lavender Hill Mob drew crowds, while carry-on films began their cheeky reign later in the decade. People dressed smartly for a night out. Men in ties, women in hats, even for the local picture house. Before every film came the Pathé newsreel, delivering glimpses of the wider world. Coronations, discoveries, sports triumphs. It was how many first saw Queen Elizabeth II crowned in 1953. The cinema was glamour, laughter, and escapism rolled into one. The silver screen that made even small towns feel larger than life. 4. The cup of tea that fixed everything. If the 1950s British soul had a flavor, it would taste like a hot, strong cup of tea. From factory floors to front parlors, tea was the answer to everything: grief, gossip, or good news. The kettle rarely rested. It hissed and whistled like a faithful friend. Loose-leaf tea was standard, and tea bags were still a novelty. Fresh milk was precious. So many used condensed milk for extra sweetness. The first thing guests were offered was always tea. Milk and 2 sugars, love? It was a small ceremony of care, as universal as the Union Jack. Tea bridged class divides, warmed cold fingers, and calmed troubled minds. It didn't just fill cups, it filled silences. Among all the simple pleasures that defined 1950s British life, tea stood unmatched. A humble comfort that bound a nation together one kettle at a time. 3. Street games and endless summers. Before screens, before schedules, the streets were playgrounds. Children played hopscotch in chalked squares, rolled marbles in the gutter, and swung on lampposts until mothers shouted them in for tea. Summers seemed endless, and scraped knees were badges of honor. Many bomb-damaged lots became unofficial play areas. Exciting, if slightly dangerous, adventure grounds. Old prams turned into go-karts, and imagination filled the gaps that money could not. Games like British Bulldog or Conkers taught teamwork, competition, and laughter, all without a single battery or charger. These scenes of joy and freedom helped shape a generation that grew up resilient and resourceful. They didn't need much, just friends, fresh air, and the faint smell of dinner drifting from open windows. For the children of 1950s Britain, the world outside the doorstep was an endless story waiting to be lived. 2. The hearth and home. Every British home in the 1950s revolved around its hearth, the literal and emotional center. Coal fires crackled in iron grates, drying socks, warming hands, and scenting the house with that familiar smoky perfume. Before central heating became common, the fireplace symbolized security. Evenings were spent together in that soft orange glow. Mothers mended clothes, fathers read newspapers, children dozed on rugs. The hum of the radio mingled with the pop of coal, creating a peace that feels almost sacred now. It wasn't luxury, it was life. The home might have been small, sometimes damp, often chilly, but it pulsed with warmth and rhythm. When you picture life in 1950s Britain, it's impossible not to see that flickering hearth, hear the rattle of coal, and feel the quiet contentment of being home. 1. Neighborly. Kindness and community spirit. At the heart of all these simple joys was something deeper: the kindness of people. In the 1950s, Britain wasn't rich, but it was rich in community. Doors stayed unlocked, neighbors helped raise one another's children, and people truly looked out for each other. If your light bulb blew, someone would lend you one. If you were short on sugar, a neighbor would appear at your doorstep before you even asked. During illness or grief, entire streets rallied around families, cooking meals, running errands, or simply offering tea and company. Sociologists from the Mass Observation Archive later confirmed that community cohesion peaked in these years. After the shared hardships of war, empathy became habit. People didn't have much, but they had each other. And that was enough. This unspoken generosity remains one of the most beautiful legacies of 10 simple pleasures that defined 1950s British life. The 1950s may seem like a distant memory, but their values, simplicity, gratitude, and togetherness, still speak to us today. A cup of tea, a trip to the seaside, or a neighbor's helping hand meant more than wealth ever could. These 10 simple pleasures that defined 1950s British life remind us that joy doesn't come from abundance. It comes from appreciation. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.